The representative of Israel.
Mr. President, gentlemen, may I be permitted to begin by thanking you, Mr. President, for your generous words of welcome. They will evoke an echo of particularly deep gratitude in the hearts of our people in view of the distinguished position you occupy in international councils as well as in the national life of your country, and by virtue of the outstanding part you have personally played in the decisive stages of the treatment of our problem by the United Nations. I wish also to thank the distinguished delegate of the Dominican Republic for his welcome to us at this historic juncture. This is indeed a great moment for the State of Israel. It is a great moment for the Jewish people throughout the world. One is awed by the responsibility it entails. One is uplifted by the vision it reveals for the future. The admission of Israel to this assembly is the consummation of a people's transition from political anonymity to clear identity, from inferior to equal status, protest to active responsibility, from exclusion to membership in the family of nations. At this historic juncture, our first thoughts turn to our fellow Jews in all countries. The State of Israel claims no allegiance from Jews in other lands. As a sovereign entity, it rests on the loyalty of its own citizens. It alone is responsible for its actions and policies. But from this lofty international tribune, our fervent wishes go out to all Jews for their security, for their dignified existence, and for equality of rights to them all everywhere. Israel is deeply and reverently conscious of its mission in Jewish life. It will strive to keep the Jewish name high and to live up to the noble record of the Jewish tradition. Israel will regard it as a most sacred trust to keep its doors open to all Jews who need a home. I feel impelled next to express our deep gratitude to those nations who in years gone by, when we had no voice in world councils, have championed from the international platform, whether in the League of Nations or in the organs of the United Nations, the rights and aspirations of the Jewish people and its claim to nationhood in Palestine. In particular, it is a privilege to express from this rostrum a feeling of profound and everlasting thankfulness of the Jewish people to all nations whose delegations on November 29th, 1947 raised their voice in support of the historic resolution providing for the establishment of the Jewish state, and to those who have today supported and voted for Israel's admission to this assembly. I am happy to record the fact that 54 governments, including 45 members of this assembly, have extended their recognition to Israel. Mr. President, the Jewish state arose because, in the words of Theodor Herzl, who in his prophetic insight envisioned its creation 50 years ago, it had become a world necessity. Two historic trends converged to bring it about in our time: catastrophe in Europe and achievement in Zion. At no stage in the tribulations of the Jewish people was its basic insecurity more tragically laid bare than in the last World War, when 3 out of every 4 Jews in Europe, 1 out of every 3 Jews in the world were put to death. Let it not be forgotten that this great assembly represents in its origin an anti-Nazi coalition born in common battle against the darkest force of evil that has ever menaced the destiny of civilized mankind. May it also be remembered that in that titanic and victorious struggle, not only did the Jews of all the Allied nations take a full part, but the Jews of Palestine bore their share as a nation in arms. Allied victory would have missed one of its essential, though perhaps at the time unperceived, objectives, and the triumph of the United Nations over the scourge of humanity would have remained incomplete if the Jewish people as a people had still remained homeless without a country of its own. In their ancestral home, the Jews labored long and hard to achieve this goal. By the time the mandate had terminated, they were a state in everything but name. They claimed the right of self-determination. In the framework of an emancipated Middle East, with one country after another having achieved sovereign status, the denial of independence to the Jewish people would have been a flagrant anomaly and a grievous wrong. When the hour came, the Jews knew that their survival and freedom in their own country, as well as the fulfillment of the hopes of countless generations, were at stake. In this conviction lay their ability, outnumbered and outarmed, to defend themselves and to uphold their independence. Mankind's revulsion against the European tragedy and a deep insight into the realities of Palestine found joint expression in the historic resolution. It was an act of faith, of international justice, and of creative statesmanship. Having once set that course, the Assembly never swerved. On 2 notable occasions, it refused to endorse retreats from that policy, which would have either annulled the independence of Israel or crippled its territory. By admitting Israel into its fold today, it does no more than sanction the final application of its own decree. The fact that Israel's rapid integration in the international structure is due to a deliberate decision of the United Nations has its far-reaching implications. Israel's organic connection with the United Nations has combined with its own compelling interest in dictating its course of action in international affairs, a course of undivided loyalty to the Charter of the United Nations and of consecration to the cause of peace. The pursuit of peace, Mr. President, is a treasured part of the Jewish heritage. The ideal of peace will guide Israel in shaping the relations between state and citizen, between man and his neighbor, between the state and other countries. Israel yearns for peace both in its own vital interest and out of its concern for the survival of the Jewish people. Scattered as they are in all lands, the Jews suffered incomparably more than any other people from the last war. None, therefore, dreads another war more than Israel. Moreover, peace is the very breath of Israel's existence and an indispensable condition for its growth and development. We enter an international arena beclouded by grave conflict. Though happily, our entry comes at a moment when it may be hoped that the agreement on Berlin, which is about to enter into force, will lead to a significant diminution of tension in great power relationships. Our acceptance into the family of nations is of itself a not unhopeful omen. Both the United States and the Union of the Soviet Socialist Republics were among those powers which have joined hands in welcoming Israel into the world. Among the states which have recognized Israel, all the 5 permanent members of the Security Council are now included. For its own part, and in its modest capacity, Israel extends a hand of true friendship to all peace-loving nations. Israel pledges its cooperation to them all under the auspices of the United Nations for the preservation and defense of universal peace and progress. That pledge becomes an earnest and urgent appeal when addressed to our closest neighbors, the Arab states and other nations of the Middle East. Israel is deeply aware of the common destiny uniting it with them forever. Once our own place and status have been secured, we have no higher ambition or more urgent task than to attain a relationship of good neighborliness and friendly collaboration with the peoples of that vital area. The Middle East played an outstanding role in man's progress in ancient and medieval times. Its contribution to culture and civilization has been of eternal effect. In our age, it is well capable of taking its place in the great march of modern progress. The task calls for a pooling of efforts and experience on the part of all, and for the mutual emulation of constructive examples. Israel is eager to contribute to this common endeavor. We are not aware of any serious conflict between us and our neighbors which cannot today be resolved by peaceful negotiations. The recent direct armistice agreements between Israel on the one hand and Egypt, the Lebanon, and Transjordan, respectively, on the other hand, agreements in which the sponsorship and mediation of the United Nations proved so effective, strengthened that belief. Israel's membership in the United Nations, bringing it within a common forum with 6 Arab states, may facilitate progress towards understanding. The war against Israel and its aftermath have changed some elements of the pattern envisaged in the 1947 resolution. The changes must perforce find their expression in the future peace settlement. There is no intrinsic reason why these modifications, based on new realities, should not become the subject of general consent. My government has taken careful note of the discussions held in the ad hoc committee on certain problems still outstanding between Israel and its neighbors on the one hand and between Israel and the United Nations on the other. We shall pursue our steadfast efforts to assist in the earliest possible settlement of these issues by discussions between Israel and the neighboring states and through the good offices of the United Nations. We will certainly strive to take a constructive and responsible part in whatever discussions may take place on these subjects at the next session of the General Assembly. The specific problems created by the emergence of Israel will not alone engage the attention of my government. Its efforts will be directed to the absorption of the large-scale immigration now in progress, a veritable ingathering of the exiles, and to the development of the country's resources for the benefit of all its inhabitants. Israel is fully conscious that poverty and ignorance are hereditary enemies of lasting peace. The government of Israel is determined to do all it can to root out these twin evils, to raise the standard of life of the common man without distinction of race or creed, to ensure equal rights to all, to safeguard the equality of status of men and women, to raise the dignity of labor, to guarantee the freedom of enterprise, individual and collective, within the framework of a progressive state, to ensure full religious freedom, and to add its proof that true democracy can be as fully operative for the common weal in Asia as in any other part of the world. These are the main objectives to which the government and people of Israel are pledged. I would quote here from a statement of policy made by the Prime Minister of Israel, on the basis of which the present government secured the vote of confidence from the legislature. I quote, "The foreign policy of Israel shall be based on the following principles. First, loyalty to the fundamental principles of the United Nations Charter and friendship with all peace-loving states, especially with the United States of America and the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. Second, efforts to achieve an Arab-Jewish alliance based on economic, social, cultural, and political cooperation with the neighboring countries. This alliance must be within the framework of the United Nations and cannot be directed against any of its members. Third, support for all measures which strengthen peace, guarantee the rights of men and the equality of nations, and enhance the authority and effectiveness of the United Nations. Fourth, the right of all Jews who wish to resettle in their historic homeland to leave the countries of their present abode. Fifth, the effective preservation of the complete independence and sovereignty of Israel. End of quote. Mr. President and fellow delegates, whatever share we may have in the councils of the United Nations will be devoted wholly to strengthening peace in the world, to furthering the brotherhood of peoples, and to safeguarding the equality and dignity of men. We are a young nation, but an ancient people. We are beginners in the art of practical statecraft. But it is our privilege and responsibility to be able to draw upon a rich and varied stock of universal experience. We enter this assembly, which represents the collective statesmanship of the world, in a spirit of humility, anxious for guidance and enlightenment. We hope that our ability to learn may be enhanced by the ancient teachings and age-old aspirations of the Jewish people. May it be recalled that on the most solemn day in the Jewish calendar, our people pray for the day when all the peoples of the earth shall unite in one fraternity to seek the salvation of mankind, and that it was the prophets of Israel who bequeathed to the world the vision of a time when nation shall not lift up a sword against nation, neither shall they learn war anymore. Lo yisa goy el goy herev velo yilmedu od milhama.